Okay, so let's get this started. This is a tutorial for particles. Particles are fun. So, before I even get started on that, I'm gonna get rid of some of this other stuff that I had placed down before. I'm just gonna get it out of here. And you know what? That's pretty great. That's pretty good. So, let's get a particle on here somewhere. I'm gonna put one somewhere down the road, like I guess here. Let's put it on this turn. That's a good spot for it. And I made a custom object for this particle effect. This is for like the base template particle effect that I'm going to be messing with. But usually you will find particles in this folder, and all of these particles are really good. They're really good, like preset particles from Refract themselves. There's a lot of cool stuff in here, but it's a little hard to really show off all of the options from particles. So that's why I made my own, and I forgot what I called it. I mean, I'm not going to find it like that. I think I called it template. Hold on. It says something template. Hey, there you are. There it is. There it is. So this is the particle template that I'm going to be using. I'm going to be going through all of these options, including the pro spawn patterns and all that jazz. It's going to be great. All right. So first things first, you might see that there's a color start, color middle, and color end. This is kind of self-explanatory, but when the particles spawn, they cycle through 3 different colors. And well, you can make it so when they all spawn, it starts out red, and then it's gonna fade into yellow, and then it's gonna end up fading into white when it gets near the end of its lifetime. Pretty simple stuff. I'm gonna put that all back to white. And draw mode. So draw mode, there's four different draw modes. One of them is solid, where it gets rid of like all of the transparency for the particles. They just kind of show up as, well, solid. They're not really transparent anymore. And there's a lot of like little options for this. You can change the shininess and the hardness of them. And a specular color. Like, it's kind of like how you're changing when you're changing textures for objects like these. They have like spec color and all that. It's very similar to that when you're messing with these. Shininess is like the emit in a way. And additive, or well, just add, is in additive transparency particles. You can change the brightness of this too. Very bright. And alpha is a bit different than additive transparency. This one is just transparency without the additive. At least that's what I like to call it. And finally, blend add, which is very similar to additive transparency, but main difference is that the colors blend with each other a bit more. Best way I can explain that. So let's move on. Let's move on from here. I'm gonna put it back on add. And fade sharpness. Fade sharpness is just how fast it fades away. The higher the number, the faster it or not faster. Alright, let me just change the number real quick. So now that I have it at 50, 50 is the max value, by the way. Now that I have it at 50, it just once the particles get to the end of their lifetime, they just disappear really fast, and then they just come back really fast. And when it's that really low number, that's when the particles take a bit longer to fade out completely. You can also set this to like 0.2. It's way slower. 0.01. I don't know if it's gonna ever get out of fade. But that's what you can do with fade sharpness. Just all that. So image index. This is all of the different shapes and just shapes. These are all the different shapes the particles can take. There's a lot of them. I'm pretty sure there's 111, I'm pretty sure. Let's just check if that's the max. I'm pretty sure it's 111. Yeah, that's the max. So there's 111 particles to choose from, and there's a lot of good ones in here. Of course, there's a lot of shapes. There's also a lot of some foliage up here. There's the lightning, there's some numbers, there's the skull, there's the alliance symbol. Just a lot of different stuff that you might want to use these shapes for. I'm going to go back to 0. And let's go through the scale. Scale is also really simple. This is the literal scale of the particles. Like if I were to change this to 50, they become massive and also incredibly bright. Let's put it back to 5. And the average scale, of course, is just the average of the scale start, middle, and end. This works very similar to the colors, so I'm not really going to stick on that. Particle count, also fairly simple. It's just the amount of particles. You can't put over a certain number. That's the number. If you do more than 16,383, it won't let you. But you really shouldn't ever need to use this many particles, because that's a little insane, and also it might increase the amount of lag that happens during the level. You don't want that either. And time scale, this is how... Actually, let me go over lifetime first. Lifetime is how long the particles will stay out in existence. Like if this is 20, these particles are going to exist for 20 seconds, and then they'll get to the end of their cycle and repeat. What did I have it at? I had it at 3 seconds. And timescale is just how it's like. So say if I had this at 2 and I put the timescale at 2, this is now going to take 1 second instead of 2 seconds. So just keep that in mind. That's what timescale does. It scales the lifetime in its own way. And spawn bounds. I'm not going to go over pro time controls just yet. We'll get back to that. Spawn bounds. The spawn bounds is, well, type of bounds that it spawns in. So right now it's a box. In this box, you see there's a yellow box. That's where all the particles spawn. And this green box is where all the particles will be. It's a little hard to explain, but it depends on the gravity of the particles, which, yes, if you give the particles gravity, they do react to gravity. Right now gravity is facing upward, so it's going that way, but the green box moves to show like how far the particles can go. And for some reason, I don't know why, but if you change the particle velocity, the green box doesn't care about that. It only cares about the gravity. So let's go back to the spawn bounds. So if I change this to a cylinder, now it's going to look like that. And you might notice that they're all spawning around in this cylinder. And if I change the inner radius of this to 50, now they're spawning like in the radius of this cylinder. They won't spawn in the middle of this, but they will spawn like on the outsides in this area right here. And bounds height is just controlling like the kind of like the length of the cylinder or the height of the cylinder. So if I change this to 200, it's longer now. Wow. And this goes, these like little set of rules kind of goes for a lot of the other options in here. Sphere is the same, where the bound's inner radius can be shortened to like 50, and they will spawn within that. It doesn't really have a visual to show you this, but you're just gonna have to trust me on this one. The visual is real. The bound's height will change the sphere to becoming more oval-like. Which, if you want your sphere to not be a sphere, you can just make sure that the bound's height is not the same as the outer radius, because the outer radius works very similar to the cylinder, in where that is like defining like how round, like how large the circumference of the cylinder is. I don't know if that's the right word. Hope I got that point across. But let's move on to camera XY. So these are a little bit different. These depend on where your camera is. And you might notice that all of the particles are gone right now. And that's because this all depends on the fade near and fade far. And this is, fade near is like, if I change this to like low numbers, all the particles will really show up now. Yeah, they all show up. Let me make this 300 instead. Yeah, that's better. So it's not in your face as much. So fade near and fade far, it just defines like how far you can, well, fade far defines how far away these particles can be seen from relative to where the camera is. And camera XY and camera XZ only spawns particles within the range of the camera. It doesn't care about like if it's like whether or not it's on like the edge of the spawn bounds or something. Like none of the particles will render over there if your camera isn't over there. Just as long as you are inside of it, it will spawn the particles anywhere near the camera. Which camera XYZ is the exact same thing. It just adds another what's the word? I hate it when I forget words. It adds another axis to where the particles can spawn, since on XY it only spawns on the X and Y planes, while XYZ will allow it to spawn on all 3 planes, while only being close to the camera. This is very useful for rain. This is what, like, when you ever seen rain inside of a level, camera XYZ or XY is what that rain is using. So if you want to make particles like that kind of blend with the weather, camera XYZ is the way you want to go for that. So track attached bound. Let me pull this out a little bit so you can read this. Track attached. I said bounds, didn't I? Track attached box and track attached that says cylinder, not seal. This is for when your particle is attached to a track, which is why I put the track right here. Right, which is why I put the particles near the track rather. So let me just attach this to the track real fast, and then I would change it to track attached box. So you might see that these yellow boxes they look a little weird, but that is showing where the particles are going to spawn based on where it is on the track. Let me pull this back down. There we go. And when you change, I believe this is the Z-axis. When you change the Z-axis on the track attached spawn bounds, that changes how far along the track it will spawn on. And now you can see, like, the yellow boxes have stretched out a bit more to fit with the track. This is good if you want some particles to just, well, be on the track, so it just follows along on the track. It's also good for making particle trails. You can attach these particles to an invisible spline, and you can just have them follow along a trail. And it also has a cylinder-shaped version of this instead of a box shape, which it has the same kind of cylinder values. Again, if I make this 50, the inner radius kind of stretches towards the center. So those are 2 options for keeping particles on track, but it will not do this if you don't have it actually attached to a track. It would be kind of confused. So I already went over what gravity does, but what's particle velocity? Also self-explanatory. It's just how fast the particles move. I just set it to 500, and they're zooming out at the speed of light. We don't even see them anymore. Let me put that back to, yeah, I think it was 10. Okay. So looking at camera. Look at camera is how particles will, well, always look at the camera. If you set it to this value, they will always be looking at the camera no matter how it's rotated. This is good for if you want the particles to, well, not do this, so you don't have to look at them from the side. And it looks a lot better when particles are not doing that, usually. And is directional is dependent on the particle velocity, where, well, basically, depending on how fast the particle is moving, it will stretch based on that speed. That's why it's a lot less stretch when I put it to 1 and a lot more stretch when I put it to 100. Let me put this back to 10. And a directional length is how much it will stretch based on that speed. And subdivision count, which I don't think I have a really good way of visualizing this, but the description says that it smooths how the particles get stretched. Sometimes the particles stretch a little bit weird, and subdivision counts can make it appear a little bit smoother. Which only use that if your directional particles look really weird. It's just a good way of fixing that. And twirl! I'm going to use a different particle image to show that it's twirling. So twirl is making the particles spin. They all spin now. You can make them spin really fast if you want. I don't know why you would want this, but you can do that. And set it to 0, of course, if you do not want it to spin at all. I'm going to move it back to this image. Some particles look like nothing if they're spinning, which is why I changed it. Like, you can't really see this. Actually, you can see it a little bit. It's like they're shaking. So cone emitter. This is where things get really interesting. So the cone emitter will force the particles to move in certain directions. And the reason why it's named cone emitter is because if I go to one of these particles, it allows you to do stuff like this flame right here will come out as a cone in a way. So like right now its angle outer is at 10. If I were to raise this to 50, it now comes out at 50 degrees instead of 10 degrees. And angle inner is very similar to how the cylinder works. You know, when I had it on when I had the spawn bounds on cylinder and I had an inner radius and an outer radius, think of it similar to that. The angle inner is just the inner side of the angle, and the angle outer is how far it goes. It's the max value. Angle inner, the min value. Angle outer, the max value. Let me set this back to 0. And the cone latitude and longitude is just, well, the latitude and longitude of the cone. So if I set this to 0, now it's going to be pointing straight up. If I set that to 180, I think it's 180. No, it's 90. It only goes to 90. My bad. Let me set this back to 0. And I set that one to 90. Now it's like rotated that way. And negative 90 would be rotated the other way. Where if I did like, I don't know, negative 90 on you, you'd be going that way. So that's how you can like change like which direction this cone is facing. But the reason why this comes out as a cone is because the spawn bounds on this object is really, really small. All the particles are spawning in basically the same location, and they're just bursting outwards in a cone. When I do the cone emitter on this very large particle that you see right now, it looks a lot less like a cone. But the main point of why I want to select it, there you go. The main point of why you would want to even turn on the cone emitter, even if you have really large spawn bounds, is because you can make all the particles move in very specific directions. So like right now, it's all moving upward. Again, if I change the latitude, all the particles are now moving towards a different direction based on the latitude and longitude of the cone. You can also change the angle outer to make all the particles move up to 94 degrees in a certain direction. I'm going to turn cone emitter off. And is static and time offset. I'm going to be talking about both of these. So static will allow you to make the particles just not move at all, but you might notice that they have all disappeared, and that's because it is currently at the very first frame of when it spawns, and you would want to change the time offset so you would actually see them, because they haven't faded in completely yet. So if I changed it to like the time offset of 2, or is it? Yeah, 2. Now you can see all of the particles that are there. So you can just keep changing the time offset to what you want for whatever time offset that you need. You can still change the time offset without static on, but there's just less of a point of doing that. And one shot will just make it so the particles only happen once. It'll go away now. It'll never come back. So this is just for if you want a particle to just happen a single time and never again. When you load in a level, that means the particle is going to go off. But you can also attach an event to this. If you make an event listener and pass through that event trigger, then the one shot will trigger based on the event rather than it loaded in the level. And then it goes off. And I believe that's the only thing that the particle really uses with events. I believe. I could be wrong about that, but let's take off the events. We're going to move on from one shot, and we're going to go to the seed. So the seed is a little bit weird. So the seed is basically what the number that the particle uses for its randomized value when it loads in a level. If your seed is negative, the particle is going to appear a little bit different every single time. But if your seed is positive and you load into the level, the particle is going to do the exact same thing every single time. So if you want your particles to appear a bit more random, you would set the seed to a negative value, and the seed would be at a positive value if you want it to if you're okay with it doing the same thing every single time. And if you're using multiples of the same particle effect, then you might want to change the seed to a slightly different number. All this is going to do is make the particle just act a little bit differently from a particle with a different seed, even though the particle have the same exact values otherwise. It just changes its random seed. Alright, so I've already gone over what fade near and fade far is. This is like the minimum and the maximum of how far away these particles can be seen from. Right now I have it at, I should put it back to where it was before, so you can see this from anywhere. And if you have a lot of particles, like visuals particles from where the driver is, like from where the camera is, if there's a lot of particles at play, it might lag the game, so make sure to space out your particles a little bit. And let me move on to the pro stuff. This is where stuff gets a little bit complicated. Let's start off at the pro time controls. So there's lifetime variance, respawn time variance, and spawn time variance. So you'll most likely just be using spawn time variance. This will change. This goes from 0 to 1, and this is basically saying, like, okay, every single particle that gets spawned, all 1,000 of these particles will be spawned at different times. You could lower this so it won't do all 1,000 particles spawned at different times. This, if I put it at like 0.5, then half of these particles will be spawning at a different time from the other half of these particles. I think that's the math there. But spawn time variance is just basically just taking all the particles and spawning them at different times. Where respawn time variance is just all the particles will respawn at different times. So I think this also only goes to 1. Yeah, it only goes to 1. And I think this only really applies if you have respawn time. This will change, like, well, the amount of time it takes until a particle will respawn. So if I have it at 3 seconds, it's going to take 3 seconds for these particles to come back after they go away. In spawn time variance, you can make it so they all come back at different respawn times based on the respawn time value. Alright, let's put these back at 0. And lifetime variance is, well, based on how long the lifetime is, it will randomize how long these particles live. And that's why some of them are just freaking out right now, because they have a lifetime of like 0.1 or something, so they're just flickering in and out at a very incredible speed. So I'm going to leave the spawn time variance up real fast, just because that's going to become relevant in a little bit. And pro physics controls, this is dependent on the gravity and the particle velocity. So the gravity latitude can be changed to different latitudes. So if I had the gravity going on at, like, I don't know, 40 right now, so you might have noticed that it was going up before, but now that I changed it at 0, now it's going to the right. And of course, the latitude and longitude, words, I can't speak. But this will affect which direction the gravity is moving. And local gravity can be turned on in case you have your particles rotated and you want the gravity to be based on this axis right now. So if I have the latitude at -90 right now, and then I rotate this, I'm gonna rotate this to like right there. All the particles still move downward, but if you wanted the gravity to be -90 based on this rotation, turn on local gravity. Or not. You can just leave it off if you want. Alright, let me put this back to normal. Let's put the gravity back to this. Or actually, let's put the gravity back to that. There we go. So you can also change the variance of the velocity. So if I put this to 1, then all the particles will have different speeds, and the max will be 10, where the least it'll be based on the the velocity variance. So if I were to change this, like, I don't know, 50, like, not all of these particles are moving at the speed of 50. That's what the velocity variance is doing. Oh boy, I'm gonna take a little drink of water real fast. So acceleration is just exactly what it sounds like. This will give the particles acceleration, which, be a little careful with this. If you give it big values, sometimes the acceleration just kind of zooms. You might not want that. Now, acceleration is kind of dependent on the lifetime because, of course, the longer a particle exists, the more the acceleration will affect it to go even faster. Alrighty, so that goes over pro physics controls. We can turn all that off, actually. Before I do that, I'm not going to turn all of that off. I'm going to leave this on. That's going to become relevant in a little bit. Let me put that at 20, just to make that a bit more visible. I mean. All right, this is the big boy stuff. So quantize, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and repeaters. These are a little bit weird, but let me just go over them. So X, Y, Z quantize. This means that what quantize means is that basically it's going to make it so every single particle that is spawned, all 1,000 of these particles, will only spawn on like one spot on the x-axis. So like that's the X right there. That red arrow is the x-axis, and if I change the quantize to just 1, it will only spawn in the middle of the x-axis, like based on its position. So now all of these particles, every single one of these particles, are only spawning on the x-axis. If I were to make this particle velocity be 0, like it's just they're all stuck on this one line on the x-axis. And let me put this back to normal. There we go. And this is true for every single quantize on here. There's a velocity quantize, so I can make it so every single one of these are just these are all moving at the same speed now. Even though I have the velocity variance on, they're all moving at the same locked speed. That is, I think it's at 20. I think they're all moving at the speed of 20. And like the time quantize, I have all of these, not quantize, whoa, quantize. The time quantize, I have all these spawning at different times, but if I were to make this 1, they're all going to spawn at the same time now, even though I have a time variance on when they can spawn. I'm going to put that back at 0. And angle 1 and angle 2 is very similar to cone emitter here. So now, it's not very similar, but it affects the cone emitter, I believe. I believe it doesn't do anything if the cone emitter is not active. So let's change this to like 90. They're free to go 90 degrees anywhere. If I were to change angle 1 to 1, now they're all moving specifically in this direction. If I were to change the angle 2 to 1, now they can only specifically move. Is that like 45 degrees? I think it's 45 degrees. But yeah, it's just like that. They're all stuck to like that one angle. And I believe this is doing some quaternion logic, so I don't really want to explain the math behind angle 1 and angle 2. I believe it's quaternion logic though. I haven't really messed with angle 1 and angle 2 that much, but the point is that it's forcing the angles to only one angle when you put it to 1. That makes any sense. And if I were to put the Y to 1, now they can only spawn all right here, because they're all stuck to one spot on the Y-axis. And if I were to change the Z to 1, now they're all spawning in the exact same location, even though I could have just changed the spawn bounds to 0 to make them all spawn in the same location. But if I wanted to do this, I can. Or I can change it to 2, so now they spawn in 2 places on the Z-axis. And the reason why it does it in the middle is because it's taking how far it's taking this Z right here, and it's basically dividing it by 100, so it spawns just exactly in the middle. And it would divide it by 50 to get this. It would divide it by whatever decimal number it would get to get this. There's a little bit of math that goes into this. Sorry, let me go over to repeaters now, since repeaters are a little bit weird. The best way I've explained repeaters is that it's doing what quantize is, but backwards. So if I were to put this, so you know how we have like 1,000 particles right now? So if I were to take the repeater and put 1,000, it would make all of them spawn exactly in the middle, instead of like wherever they want to spawn. So if I put this at 40, actually no. If I put this at 50, no wait, 500. Yeah, there we go. So now they're only spawning in those two locations, which would be the same as if I put the quantize at 2. That's what the repeater does. And this is true for all of these. And the reason why you would want to use these spawn patterns is because it allows you to do a lot of fancy things, which I'll show you what some of those things are right here, because Refract made some. I'm pretty sure a lot of these use spawn patterns, especially Dreamwave. Dreamwave is a really good example of like using spawn patterns. I'm like extremely sure about this. So yeah, this one has like how many particles? It's got like 300 particles, an X repeater of 11, and a Z repeater of 1. If I change this to like, I don't know, 0. No, that's not 0. 0. No. Let me change it to like 60. Oh, I guess it doesn't affect it that much. But the X repeater is definitely affecting this a lot. So now it looks like this. And let me change it to like 60, and it looks like this now. You can do a lot of cool spiral effects with these, with the repeaters and the quantize. And the only reason why this is even working is because the time repeater is at 2. Which if it was at 0, it just kind of do it randomly. If it was at 1, you'd only see one of these spirals going on. Which now there's 3 spirals. Now there's 5 spirals. There's a lot of really neat things you can do with it. Which Dreamwave, I'm going to go to Dreamwave because Dreamwave looks really pretty. Dreamwave uses some very specific values to do this, but you're able to make cool effects like this. And it's really nice. It's very, very nice. So if you ever want to get into pro spawn patterns, definitely mess with it a lot. You don't really have to do a lot of math usually. Usually you can just kind of, you know, be like, okay, let's just mess with quantize a little bit. Let's put this number. Let's put this number. And sometimes you'll actually start getting what you want. Of course, you can also learn the math that goes into it. But it's not as bad as you might think once you start experimenting with it. I was able to make some pretty neat stuff with this too, but it'd probably take me a while to find it. Take me a little while. Oh yeah, I made this. Let me get Dreamwave out of here. So using pro spawn patterns, I made this, this is 3 different particle effects, but I was able to do a little cool thing like that. And it's very nice. All right, let's get at it. Let's get out of here. And I need to go over one more thing with particles. It's really, really, really important. I'm just gonna spawn a random particle for this one. This is very important. So you see these values up here, the randomize a little, randomize in bounds, and randomize all. This is a really good way to just discover what particle effects can do. So if I were to just boom, it just randomized every single value in the particles. It just gave me a random particle effect. And sometimes you can't really come up with a good idea of what you want to do with particles, and you can just mess with this for a little while and figure out like what's a cool particle effect to get. Or you could randomize in bounds if you want like something a little bit better, like I want everything to randomize inside of a box that is 100 by 100 by 100. That's the size of the box. I want everything to randomize, but within this box. You can do randomize in bounds. I can't see the particles. Now I can see them. And it will only randomize within the bounds that you've already set. Or you can do randomize a little, which I don't know the exact parameters that randomize a little manipulates. But it doesn't manipulate a lot of them. In fact, I don't even think it's changing the colors right now. Oh, nope, it changed the colors. I don't know what randomize a little really goes after when changing things, but it doesn't do a whole lot, is the point. And that's it. That's all of the different options that you can do with particles. Now that you know all of this, go out and do something cool with it. You now know how particles work.